On the night of July 3, 1954, the Sheppard family home in Bay Village, Ohio, sat on a quiet curve along Lake Erie. It was the kind of place middle-class Americans dreamed of in the 1950s. A successful young doctor, a pretty wife, a young son, and another child on the way. By the morning of July 4th, that image was gone forever. 31-year-old Marilyn Sheppard was found bludgeoned to death in the upstairs bedroom. Her husband, Dr. Sam Sheppard, claimed he had fought with a mysterious intruder and been knocked unconscious. Within days, this lakeside tragedy became front-page news. Within weeks, it turned into one of the most notorious murder cases in American history. Sam Sheppard was arrested, tried, and convicted of murdering his wife. More than a decade later, the United States Supreme Court would rule that his first trial was so saturated with prejudicial publicity and judicial misconduct that it had violated the Constitution. In a second trial, he was acquitted. The case remains officially unsolved. Was Sam Sheppard a murderous husband who lied about an intruder to save himself? Or was he the victim of a rush to judgment, framed in the court of public opinion before the evidence had even been fully examined? This is the story of the Marilyn Sheppard murder, the trials of Dr. Sam Sheppard, and the unanswered question that still hangs over a quiet house on Lake Erie. Who really killed Marilyn? In the early 1950s, Bay Village, Ohio, was a comfortable suburb west of Cleveland. It was a place of well-kept yards, friendly neighbors, and a sense that big city problems happened somewhere else. The Sheppards were one of the town's most respected families. Sam's father and brothers were all doctors, and together they operated the Bayview Hospital in nearby Rocky River. Sam himself was a young osteopathic surgeon, seen as part of a rising medical dynasty. Marilyn had grown up in a middle-class family and met Sam in high school. They married in 1945 after he returned from wartime service in the Navy and settled into what seemed like a classic post-war success story. A handsome couple, a comfortable home on Lake Road, and a young son named Sam Reese, known as Chip. By the summer of 1954, Marilyn was 4 months pregnant with their second child. Neighbors knew them as a busy but admired family. Sam often on call at the hospital, Marilyn active in social life and caring for their son. Beneath the polished surface, there were strains. Later testimony and reports suggested that the marriage was not as perfect as it looked. Rumors circulated about Sam's close relationships with several women, including a lab technician at the hospital. In a small community, gossip traveled quickly. Some people whispered that the doctor was not as faithful as he appeared. Others dismissed it as idle talk. The Sheppard clan itself was close-knit and influential. Sam's brothers and his father were protective of both the family's reputation and the hospital's future. They lived nearby and were frequent visitors to the Lake Road house. Outside the family, local officials and police were used to dealing with more ordinary crimes. Drunk drivers, petty theft, the occasional domestic disturbance, a savage killing in the home of the town's most prominent doctor was something no one in Bay Village had prepared for. In that world, respectable, tightly knit, and often more concerned with appearances than with uncomfortable truths. The events of July 1954 would be like a bomb going off in the middle of a quiet street. The Sheppards spent July 3, 1954, in typical holiday fashion. They had dinner with friends who lived nearby and watched a movie together in the evening. Later that night, Sam said he fell asleep on the couch in the living room while Marilyn went upstairs to bed. The lake outside the house was calm, and the town was settling into the Independence Day weekend. In the early hours of July 4th, something terrible happened. According to Sam Sheppard, he was jolted awake by the sound of his wife screaming his name. He ran upstairs and found a figure he later described as a form with bushy hair standing near Marilyn's bed. Sam said he struggled with the intruder. He claimed they fought in the bedroom and then down by the lake shore, where he was struck on the head and knocked unconscious. When he came to, he said, he stumbled back into the house and found his wife badly injured and unresponsive. Around 5:40 in the morning, Bay Village's mayor, who was also a close family friend, received a frantic phone call from Sam. He and his wife rushed to the house. They found Marilyn lying in bed, her upper body covered in blood, the room in disarray. She had been struck repeatedly in the head with a blunt object, leaving deep wounds and massive blood loss. Downstairs, Sam appeared disoriented and in pain. He would later be found to have a swollen face, injuries to his mouth, and a serious neck injury that doctors described as a cervical concussion. The house showed signs of a struggle, but also of something else. Drawers were partially open, items disturbed, and some belongings missing, including Sam's wristwatch, a ring, and a t-shirt. At the same time, there was no clear sign of forced entry and no obvious pattern of ransacking like a typical burglary. Police arrived and began their work. They found large amounts of blood in the bedroom and stairwell. They noted that Marilyn's pajama top had been pushed up, but there was no clear evidence of sexual assault. Outside, the lake shimmered as the July sun came up. Inside, a young mother lay dead, her unborn child lost with her, and her husband claimed that a stranger had slipped in and out of their home without being caught. What happened in that bedroom, and whether anyone besides the Sheppards was inside the house that night, would become the central question of the case. In the early hours, officers treated the Sheppard home as both a crime scene and the center of a personal tragedy. It did not take long for suspicion to turn toward Sam. Investigators looked closely at the physical evidence. Marilyn had been struck at least a dozen times. The blows were concentrated on her head and face, suggesting rage rather than a quick, opportunistic killing. Blood spatter patterns on the walls and ceiling told of a violent attack within the confined space of the bedroom. The crime did not look like a typical burglary gone wrong. The missing watch, ring, and t-shirt could suggest staging. Valuables elsewhere in the house appeared untouched. Police also considered Sam's injuries. They were real. He had neck trauma and claimed to have lost consciousness twice, but some investigators questioned whether they were consistent with a prolonged fight with a powerful intruder. At the same time, detectives began to learn more about the Sheppards' marriage. Rumors of Sam's affair with a laboratory technician soon surfaced. To the police, and later to prosecutors, this suggested motive. A man who might want out of a marriage, or a wife who had confronted him about his infidelity. Into this already tense situation stepped the press. Cleveland's newspapers took a keen interest in the case from the start. Reporters visited the crime scene, interviewed neighbors, speculated on Sam's guilt, and called for action in bold front-page headlines. One editorial famously asked why Sam Sheppard was not already in jail. It was published just days before authorities finally arrested him. The line between investigation and media campaign blurred. Officers and prosecutors read the same papers as the public. Officials felt intense pressure to show they were not giving a wealthy doctor special treatment. Sam's story about a bushy-haired intruder raised further questions. No one in the immediate vicinity reported seeing a stranger leaving the Sheppard home. Police searched the lakefront and nearby areas but found no solid trace of an unknown attacker. From a law enforcement perspective, the puzzle began to look simpler. A wife murdered in bed, a husband present in the house, a troubled marriage, and an admitted affair. Inconsistent details in the intruder story. On July 30th, 1954, roughly 3 weeks after the killing, authorities arrested Sam Sheppard and charged him with second-degree murder. The investigation now shifted into the courtroom, but the question of whether it had truly been fair and thorough would haunt the case for decades. Years later, when the case was revisited, new evidence and witnesses would cast doubt on the original investigation. Attention would focus on Richard Eberling, a window washer and occasional handyman for the Sheppards, who later admitted stealing from the house and gave conflicting statements about bloodstains on his clothing. At the time, however, Bay Village and the broader public saw one man in handcuffs, a grieving but controversial husband, and a prosecution ready to present a story of jealousy, rage, and betrayal. When Sam Sheppard was brought to trial in October 1954, the courtroom did not feel like a quiet place of law. It felt like an extension of the front page. Reporters crowded the benches. Photographs of the defendant and key witnesses appeared almost daily in Cleveland's newspapers. The judge allowed extensive media presence and was later criticized for private comments, suggesting he believed Sam was guilty before the trial even ended. The prosecution built a familiar, if circumstantial, narrative. They argued that Sam Sheppard was a man with a successful career, a prominent name, and a serious problem: a failing marriage and a pregnant wife who stood in the way of a new life. They highlighted his affair, bringing the other woman to the stand to testify about their relationship. To the jury, this affair could be seen as both motive and evidence of character. They also emphasized the brutality of the attack and the lack of a clear sign of outside intrusion. To prosecutors, this pointed to a domestic killing, carried out in a burst of anger by someone close to Marilyn, rather than a random stranger. The defense told a different story. Sam's lawyers argued that police had fixated on Sam too quickly, ignored evidence that might support the intruder theory, and allowed the press to poison the public against him. They pointed to Sam's injuries as signs of a genuine struggle. They questioned whether the crime scene had been properly protected, especially after reporters and officials had walked through the house. But the atmosphere inside and outside the courtroom was stacked against them. Prospective jurors had read months of sensational coverage. Some discussed the case with reporters during the trial, a clear violation of basic fair trial principles. On December 21, 1954, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Sam Sheppard was sentenced to life in prison. To many in Bay Village, the case was closed. A wife had been avenged, a dangerous man removed from society, and order restored. But beyond Ohio, and especially among civil liberties advocates and some legal scholars, doubts grew. They saw a trial dominated by headlines, a judge who appeared biased, and a defendant who might have been convicted not just on the evidence, but on his affair and his failure to fit the image of the grieving husband the public expected. Sam spent nearly a decade behind bars. During that time, his parents died, his reputation was destroyed, and his young son grew up with the shadow of the case over his life. In the mid-1960s, a new lawyer, F. Lee Bailey, took up Sam's case. Bailey argued that the first trial had been a mockery of due process, a media circus that turned the courtroom into a stage show. In 1966, the United States Supreme Court agreed. In the case of Sheppard versus Maxwell, the court ruled that Sam Sheppard had not received a fair trial because of prejudicial publicity and the judge's failure to control the atmosphere. They overturned his conviction and ordered a new trial. At the retrial later that year, Bailey mounted a more aggressive defense. He attacked the forensic evidence, suggested alternative suspects like Richard Eberling, and portrayed Sam as the victim of a biased system, not a calculating killer. This time, the jury acquitted Sam Sheppard. After 12 years, he walked out of court, a free man but not a restored man. His medical career was gone, his health was broken, and the question of who killed Marilyn had only grown more complicated. Sam Sheppard's acquittal did not bring a happy ending. He was a free man, but he was also a middle-aged ex-convict whose medical license and reputation had been shattered. He tried to rebuild his life. For a time, he returned briefly to surgery, but questions about his skills after years in prison and renewed public attention made that difficult. In a strange twist, he even tried a short career as a professional wrestler, playing on his own notoriety. His health declined. He struggled with alcoholism and died in 1970 at the age of 46 from liver disease. Marilyn's murder remained officially unsolved, and the cloud over his name never fully lifted. In the decades that followed, others tried to answer the question the courts could not. New forensic reviews and investigative work focused on Richard Eberling, the window washer who had worked in the Sheppard home and later admitted stealing from it. Some experts argued that blood and other clues pointed more strongly at Eberling than at Sam, though he was never charged with Marilyn's murder and later died in prison for a different killing. Sam and Marilyn's son, Sam Reese Sheppard, spent much of his adult life trying to clear his father's name completely. In the 1990s, he brought a civil, wrongful imprisonment suit against the state of Ohio, arguing that his father had been an innocent man. A jury ultimately rejected that claim, leaving the case in a legal limbo. Conviction overturned, later acquittal, but no formal declaration of actual innocence. What is certain is that the Sheppard case changed American law. The Supreme Court's decision in Sheppard versus Maxwell laid down new guidelines for how judges must protect a defendant's right to a fair trial from prejudicial media coverage. It became a landmark decision cited in later cases, where cameras, headlines, and public opinion threatened to drown out evidence and law. For people who study wrongful convictions, the case stands as an early warning. It shows how quickly a community can decide what must have happened, how an affair can become the center of a murder theory, and how a defendant's behavior or failure to behave as expected can be read as guilt. Decades later, Marilyn's death is still the painful center of this story. Regardless of who swung the weapon that night, a young woman and her unborn child were taken in a brutal attack that has never been fully explained. So, what do you think? Did the system get it right the first time? Or the second time, or did it fail both Sam and Marilyn? Do you believe an unknown intruder killed her? That the true killer was someone else entirely? Or that the first jury was closer to the truth than the one that acquitted him? If you found this deep dive into the Sheppard case helpful and you'd like to see more historical crime stories about controversial trials and possible wrongful convictions, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing this video. And let us know in the comments which forgotten case you think deserves a closer look next.